episode 105, where I am congested tonight and doing a live stream and programming an NES game live on Twitch from scratch. Retro USB, stop doing these during your dinner. Sorry. Move to the East Coast. I don't know. This is the time that works. I can... I don't know what to tell you. For the people in Europe, they should be in bed. You should be eating dinner. Here, I'll respond. Sorry. Just tell your family to make it mandatory dinner watching. How about that? Mandatory dinner watching. So, in the last stream, this is going to be a relatively short one, just because, as you can probably hear, excuse me, I have a cold, but I did want to do this because, as I mentioned, I will be, sorry, I'll be traveling, and so there will likely not be any episodes or streaming for the next couple of weeks. And yeah, and so wanted to get this one in before I'm gone. And then, we'll come back to it, hopefully. So in the last stream, we were working on repeating background tiles, and what I was trying to do is get the game to switch from the map over to the repeating background tiles in a way that was relatively normal or natural looking. This looks like garbage. I am definitely not an artist. And in the process, we got the transition to occur with some changes to the way that we were populating things in memory, and that was looking pretty good. And so what I need to do next is I want to make it populate the full meta tile, and let's choose an interesting color for the center. Let's make it blue. We'll save that. I have the microphone in such a way that I keep bumping it. Let me move that. And so let's just dig right into that while I have my voice and have the energy to do this. So let's do this. Let's convert let's see what that looks like. All right, that was moderately successful. That's good. So we'll use that in place of the other bumper tile we had there. If we go into our map, I think that'll get updated to look correct. Yep, so that's what that's going to look like there. I guess we should probably... I don't know why it's got all that extra stuff there. We should probably modify the background palette color, although I don't know. I don't care about that right now. Just want to make sure that looked okay. So for now, that's looking good. And if I export, that, stop it. Seriously, get out of there. If we export that, no, stop it. Here's all our export stuff. Let's go back to here and move this in. And let's make the game and reload it. And barring the weirdness that we saw. Hey, alright, so that looks good. Well, you know, what we should do is we should figure out why the ship is now crawling up the screen. Hey, Bonchaku, how's it going? You'll have to excuse my voice for this stream. The cold I thought I was getting, I got. So I'm congested and just trying to make some progress here. Alright, so let's look at why when we do that switch to the repeat scroll, the ship starts to crawl up the screen. Yeah, we had something going around at work. Another person was sick. Actually, my daughter got sick, and my mother-in-law has a cold too. It's just that time of year. The weather finally changed over to being sort of nice, so now I got a cold. Yeah, it would only be trying to get away from the boss if I actually took sick days. So let's see what's going on. Done with object increment. I want to take a look and see if the object, the entity, well, I guess it must be changing. Well, the sprite is changing, but I wonder if, oh, you meant the ship. That's pretty funny. I thought you meant me being sick. All right, let's see something here. This is not loading. It looks like this is not loading the player information properly. Why is that? Probably because the player moved. I moved the entity's memory quite a few episodes back, I guess now, out of the 0 page and into the RAM. Keep passing it. Where the hell is that? Oh, right, because there are two lists. So I forgot we split that. I was thinking about the old list. The RAM, I believe that starts at 100, but we've got the projectiles there now. You know, the easiest thing is probably just to switch these around. And then that should make the script work. Yeah, it just kind of got nice here in New York as well. Although it cooled off this evening and it's supposed to get colder again. We've been getting a lot of rain, so we've had a couple of nice days finally, and it seems like it never fails. As soon as the weather sort of changes, I end up getting sick. Alright, instead of guessing, I should probably just look at what the what the configuration is there, because I thought it was at 100, but maybe it's not. I don't know. Are you going to open up? Thank you. It's starting at 200. If it's starting at 200, what's using up that whole 255 bytes? 0 page and RAM, and I don't have anything in between them. Oh, the stack. No. Wait, is it the stack? Yeah, I guess because I have the stack there. Okay, yeah. That's right. The stack is at 1FF. Get out of here, Acronis. So let's make this 200, and that'll give us our player information like I wanted. Maybe. No. Player, CPU, mem type at 200 divided by 8. That's the Y world position. So, oh, this also has to be 200. Guess I have to change all the addresses, right? Okay. So let's see what's going on here with the player object when we transition over. Yeah, so why did that... Well, okay, so the camera... Oh, because we never reset the player position. Right, we reset the camera position, but then we never set the player position, and then it continues to change. That makes some sense. So, all right. So when we change the camera position to reflect the fact that we've switched to the scrolling, the problem is we're not decrementing from that. We had done a change to try and make that work, but then that created a separate problem. So let's see. So we have 4B0. And I guess what we should do is we should take the player position and add it, the Y world position, to 4B0 to adjust it so it's the equivalent. So that's B0, and then we're going to load objects. Y world position. No, sorry, add with carry. You know, clear the carry here. Branch with carry is clear to skip this part. We should probably do it in the opposite order, because we want the addition to occur once we've got the player's Y world position added to this offset here. So keep doing this. Clear and then add and then store it into entity Y world position +1. And we load and we clear, we add, and if the carry is clear, we skip this part. Otherwise, we need to increment object entity Y world plus position, not +1. And that will reset the player's world position to reflect its what's the problem? Besides me making a silly mistake. Oh, is it really? Okay. You're just going to give me a hard time because it's... I can't type. Oh boy. Alright. Range error, my favorite kind. 1017. 1017. Really? Where are you jumping to? Skip scroll process. Okay. Branch if equal to this relative position, and then otherwise jump here. There you go. Let's see what that looks like. Those engine bugs should be figured out as early as possible. Once you have multi-threaded plus bank task, it's hard to figure out what's causing the bug, even with Mess Debugger. Yeah, I am trying to kind of get through these problems as I go. If it's, you know, if it's something relatively serious like this, if it's less so, then you know, I'll leave it. But this is kind of important. I don't want the ship to be drifting like that. Okay, so this is still going to be a problem because the camera is not changing. Oh man, you got it mixed in with C code too. Yeah, I can see that being frustrating. All right. So now we should probably process what I was trying to mess with on Tuesday was the camera position code. I was using the camera counter, and then I was gonna move the whole thing that modifies the camera position out of this part because it really applies to everything. And then I was thinking we could use the camera's Y position as sort of our counter. Instead of having a separate loop counter through the repeating tiles. All right, so let's see. I guess this is actually probably a bad... Oh, it's not the only check. Okay, that's fine then. So we're incrementing the camera counter, loading it, checking to see if we hit the count we need. If we have, we will reset the camera counter and check the background mode. All right, so probably want to put it right here. So this is all... Here, I'm just going to kind of split this up. This is repeat scroll processing, just to kind of make it a little more obvious. All right, and then so this part where we're processing scroll Y, that can get moved because that is shared code. So we want that to be here regardless of what we're doing. And then this is checking scroll Y to do the AND. That's good. This is the same code that we got. This is the same code we just dealt with up here, right? Store A scroll Y, load AEF scroll Y. Okay. So this is the same. The only thing it's not doing is it's not incrementing the scroll counter. I don't know. I don't remember if we care about that or not. But let's take care of this. Oh, I don't even need to do that. Why don't I just there. Instead of putting a note to myself, just do it. Alright, so that's that, and then this is our camera we're processing. So we've processed the scroll, we've now processed the camera, and then we're checking which background mode we're using, if we're using the repeat scroll or the map scroll. This is checking if we've hit the bottom to see if we need to... This is the force scroll here that we implemented. Okay. Getting better at detecting when I'm going to sneeze and mute myself. I had to do that a few times on a conference call today at work. All right, so let's see here. All right, so now the ship isn't totally wigging out, which is good. That looks normal. The camera, yeah, that looks good. So the rate of the camera change is slightly different because the script is showing the camera at its raw rate, whereas with the player, it is showing the tile that it's currently on. So all of that looks pretty good. We just need to make that transition a little bit smoother, because right now what it's doing is it's forcing... I wonder why it's forcing the player to jump like that, because it should be... Yeah, see, it jumps the player down to the bottom. Oh, you know what? Let's rewind here for a second. One of the things I've been toying with design-wise with the game is I'm strongly considering... Why isn't this rewinding? Let's just play through it again. I'm strongly considering... one thing that I like that newer games have implemented is that while they might still be sort of horribly, terribly difficult, they have removed lives and numbers of continues, and basically made it so that you... All right. They basically made it that, you know, while you don't have to worry about starting all over from the beginning, they certainly don't go easy on you as sort of the trade-off. And I kind of like that approach. I'm all for a game being hard. I don't necessarily like a game where it forces you to do stuff over and over, just for padding out the length of the game, or because it was designed, you know, like an arcade game, like Ikaruga. You know, that was an arcade game, so it makes sense that it's designed to make you play over and over again, because it was designed to take your quarters or your tokens or whatever it was, to take your money, right? So I totally get why it works that way. I'm just not thrilled with that approach personally. So let's see. So why do we jump to 300? Let me remove the... I'm going to remove the division here. I want to see what the actual raw value is, and see if I can make some sense of what that jump actually is. Well, yeah, loot boxes is certainly one way of describing it. I mean, but it's different, right? Like, loot boxes are... I would say loot boxes are really different than quarters, because... No, maybe not. Maybe that is the modern evolution of arcade machines, where back in the day that was the only way they could get your money. You know, someone bought the game and then they took your quarters away, because that was how they paid for the machine, and now you have loot boxes to pay for the development instead of an arcade owner buying a really expensive machine. I'm trying to see what the correlation is. It's almost like it's a jump of about 1100. It is a jump of about 1200, I would say, right? Let's slow this down. $1,054. So, all right. So let's take a look at this. So something I'm doing with the offsetting is probably wrong. I'm glad that the ship is at least transitioning in a way where it's not totally broken. All right, let's look at this. So we're positioning the camera once it hits 0 on the map to move over to 4B0. And then we want to adjust the ship's position to reflect 4B0 as the top left portion of the screen. And so in my sort of naive way of thinking about it, I was thinking, well, we'll just take the current Y position, the world position of the ship, and turn it into the new world position offset by the camera shift that occurs. It might help me if I draw this. Hold on a second. Come on. So let's see. So we're at a point where we have the screen and we're at the bottom of it, and the ship is over here, and this is 0, 0, and then we transition over to 0, 1200, And if this player's position is at half screen, it's like at 120. So it should be like 1420 at that point, right? So why are we getting 24? Oh, what? Well, why is the player's position not 420, but instead 13? That's strange. .576 hex. It's like mainframes are now called the cloud. Yeah. I mean, the joke, and some people really hate when you joke about this. You know, people talk about the cloud, and it's like it's someone else's computer. It's just someone else's system. And I know there's more to it than that. There's virtualization and different layers and new software on top of it, but it's really just you're running it on somebody else's computer. And you can get better efficiencies by doing that because the resources are shared, and you can offset the cost of owning really powerful centralized servers by having lots of workloads that, you know, take up as much of the capacity as possible. So that's good compared to, you know, where you used to have a server that could deal with the peak load, hopefully, and it, you know, had to be up 24/7. Yeah, the concept is similar. It is decentralized computing. I mean, what's interesting about it is now that, you know, now we have these our own personal systems that are pretty powerful, but everything is happening in everything is happening in a back-end server through a web browser in these cloud applications. Oh God, yeah, COBOL or RPG, no thanks. Even C on mainframes, I heard, was tough. My uncle used to work for Verizon and did a lot of coding for them before transitioning over to be a DBA, and then eventually he consulted, and I don't think he does any work with them anymore. I think he's fully retired, but he did COBOL programming too, and it sounds like it was challenging. All right, so what am I doing wrong? The first thing is the player Y world position seems weird. Like, it seems like it's way higher than it should be. I was thinking it should be something like 120 by the time the camera is at excuse me, by the time the camera is at 0, but we're off by about 1200. Restart the game. What is the player's Y world position? I'm curious. I need to have that script window open. Yeah, I've seen a little bit of COBOL. I haven't worked in it at all, so it's not super familiar with it. Yeah, see, like that, it's a little scary to me that the player's position is so far off. Yeah, this is, well, let's think about this. Why? Am I doing something else to... What is this doing? This is doing an and one. That's just taking the position, reading a word. Let's see something here. So 0 is X, this is Y, and that's the Y world position. So is it just that the when we initialize the player, excuse me. Oh, you know what? I am hard coding the player position at start. I should probably do that based on the camera's position now. So if we load A with camera, well, this makes more sense now at least. And what we'll do is we'll add 120 to it, which is what, 7, 8 in hex. So load A, clear the carry. Oh, well, you know what? We don't even have to do that. We just load A and store A into objects, entity Y world position plus 1. So that's that. And then load A camera, Y position, store it into objects plus entity Y world position plus, no, we should also do the add here of 7, 8. We're going to carry clear to there. All right, so that should position the player about halfway down the screen when the game starts based on the camera position. Oh good, and I used 7, 8 over here for the screen position. You know, that might explain why when the game starts the player kind of does a little jump jive shimmy that I never kind of took the time to bother looking at because it wasn't super important at the time. Okay, that's looking much better now. So now we're at full speed here, and the coordinates are definitely looking a lot more reasonable. Alright, so now let's go back for a second here. So we should just be getting like 13 something. It's interesting. So how do we go? From 113. Should be getting 1313. And we're not. Okay, well, making progress getting this to do what it should have done in the first place here. Now we're in the game state here. So let's see what's going on with the switch process. Oh, wait a minute. No, okay, that's right. Load 4, clear carry, add Y world position +1, and then store it. Load B0, clear carry, Y position, branch carry clear. Otherwise, that's not right. That could do it. Let's see. I'm not 100% sure that's the cause, but it certainly doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to have that math correct. Man, I'm just starting to lose my voice here. Nope, still wrong. All right. What gives, math? I trusted you. Okay, so now that's right, but let's see. That was a more reasonable value, but why 199? I mean, it's positioning it in the right spot based on that subtraction. How are we getting? How are we getting from there? Let's take a look at the code. So let's see what's going on here, because something is a little funky, where no funk is required. So, alright, so we're changing camera over to 4B0. Alright, it's at 4B0 now. Now objects, that should be at 200 hex, and our X is that, and our Y world position is 78, which is 120, so that's reasonable. That's the value, excuse me, I would expect. So where is my math error? Load A with 4, clear the carry, add Y world position 0 to A, which should give us 4, and we restore that. So now we have 478. Load A. Oh, I know what we didn't do. Can anybody else see? It's one of my classics. It's one of my classics. It's do the work, but don't remember that you did it. It's kind of like at work when you worked on a feature 6 months ago and you forgot, and then a customer asks you to do it, and you're like, oh man, I don't want to work on that. And then you go look at the code, and it turns out it's there already, and you're like, wow, I don't remember writing that. That happens when you're, implementing dozens of features, well, a month sometimes. And it's kind of a funny feeling, but you also just kind of feel good about it. You're like, all right, cool. Next feature, let's do it. All right, let's see what happens here. We should be good. Well, let's step through it just to be sure. So Alright, so we store that into objects, and let's go back to the memory here. So we have 0478 now, so if we load that and clear and add it, and we carried, so increment y position +1, very good, and then we store it, and now we actually have 528, which, let's see what that looks like. 528 is 1320. Yes, that is actually the value we wanted. So let's continue on with this craziness. And oh, look at that. The transition worked correctly. It did a little jump. It did a little pixel shimmy there. You see that? It just jumps 1 pixel. We should probably add a pixel in there for good measure so it doesn't do that. So that would be to the B0 portion of things. We'll make it B1. One thing I got to remember about this is that when we transition over from the standard background mode, that was beautiful. That was so smooth. I didn't even realize it did it. One thing we got to remember is that if we do that transition from the background mode, the background tile mode, to the repeat tile mode, we need to make sure that we don't have anything collidable, because we stop checking for background collisions when we do that transition. We may not want to do that, and we'll have to figure out how to make that work, but that was cool. That actually worked the way that I wanted. And then what we need to do is now figure out how we can make it so that the transition will allow for gradual speed changes. Although, sorry, I also kind of want to fix the attributes, as much as I hate dealing with attributes right now. Hey, MDTA UK, yeah, I have a cold, but you know, wanted to try and get this to work as much as possible. Oh, that was cool. I don't know what I crashed into, but I crashed into something. Is it just some sort of... Huh. Am I checking collisions and I'm hitting garbage? Maybe I spoke too soon. Alright, let's see. I thought I wasn't checking collisions, but you know what we can do? We'll test this by changing the I believe I had turned off the collisions in the bumper here. So let's make this whole thing collidable. I don't know. That's weird. Right. Let's re-export this. export command. I need that. I implemented invisible enemies. Yeah. Not quite so clever. It's probably just I thought we weren't checking collisions, and we're checking collisions in the garbage areas of the ROM that we're reading. It's a cloud. Look out. Alright, so let's see if we still collide now that we've... No, that's weird. Huh. Maybe it is checking for... Maybe we are getting invisible enemies. I don't know. If I go back, it might be... These mode transitions, are they just a binary switch, or do you have the ability to provide a transition in and out speed for scrolling and a mode to go to after the looped transition? So like low altitude mode transition. Yeah, the goal would be to go from... The goal would be to do something like we have the... Let's say we're in the high altitude mode where the scrolling is pretty slow. We'd be able to transition over to the, to like at least maybe a medium transition tile set. And I don't know if we would do that through something like maybe bank switching, where it's interesting. The collision is totally broken somehow. Well, anyway, ignoring that for a moment, we'd have the high altitude speed and the high altitude images, and then you transition over to medium, and the speed would also change so as to give the illusion that the ship is approaching closer to the ground. You can't see my hand, so as it's flying, it's coming down closer. And so the background has to scroll faster to continue to sort of provide that illusion of speed. And similarly, then it would potentially transition again to a lower altitude where you see more detail, but then the background would be scrolling at sort of the fastest rate. And that's where we would want to probably do sort of short bursts of map, and then switching to repeating tiles and then back and forth. Because if we're showing areas where we're providing the details with a map, that obviously requires storage to keep that data somewhere for the background. And depending on how all of this works out, I don't know how much storage we're going to have or need. I was thinking the speed could be a constant assigned to high altitude, low altitude modes, maybe just a multiplier added. Yeah, I mean, that's a possibility. I don't know, and I don't know that I'm going to know until we start pulling together these pieces and levels. It's really going to be one of those things that it's going to be more about how it feels to play than it is about knowing specifically what I want to do right now. I mean, yeah, what you're saying makes sense from a technical perspective, but a lot of times you go implement that and then find out that while technically there was nothing wrong with what you said, it doesn't do it for you. It doesn't match what you envisioned it would look like. Which is why actually trying it in the code is actually really important. and prototyping too. I mean, I've been wanting to do prototyping, but haven't found the time, which is unfortunate because it would help with the design and implementation work here on the assembly side, to kind of flesh things out a little bit more. But you're seeing the raw, you're seeing 100% raw work here on all of this. So you're seeing the whole thing. Other than, me thinking about it when I'm getting a free moment to think about how this all kind of comes together. I wanted to do prototyping in something that's a little bit faster for me to work in terms of getting things on the screen and interacting. To be honest, some of it is a little bit of laziness because I'm not super familiar with some of the tools out there that might help me do this real quickly. Honestly, part of it is looking at things and going, do I really want to write an object collision routine for prototyping? And again, it's just down to laziness, unfortunately, or prioritizing working on the assembly more so than the prototype. And so I've been, trying out ideas here. Yeah, you can do C to ASM for 6502, and in fact, that's what some people are doing. So Nathan Tolbert, who I had on in an interview in, I don't know when that was, back in November. He's got a game, the Roboninja Climb, and that's written in C with 6502 for the parts that are specific to the NES. And then he wrote it's really cool. He ported it to the Atari 2600 by keeping the C code for the core game logic and writing the Atari kernel in 6502 assembler for the Atari. And then recently, I won't say what platform because I don't know if he wants me to talk about it or not. He was working on porting it to a more modern system, again, using the exact same C or almost all the same C that he had written for the core of the gameplay, and then writing the platform specific code related to the graphics for that platform. And he had shown off a screenshot. I think it was just a screenshot of it running on the platform, and it hadn't taken that much time for him to do it. So it was pretty cool to see. I mean, C is an extremely versatile language, and where it isn't portable is where you're accessing stuff that's interfacing with the operating system. But if you can separate that stuff out and keep your core logic clean, it is fairly portable. I mean, at work we were writing, well, not my current job, my previous job, we were writing pieces in C that we were porting to, different variants of Unix and Linux, with relatively little changes. The main problem is that C on the 6502 is you got to be careful. Certain things that the compiler does just are inherently not efficient, and so for a game they just don't work. And some of it is knowing what the compiler generates and looking at it. Some of it is just having the willingness to write it in C and then go back and rework it in assembly if you see it's too slow, and having the patience to go back and look at the performance and figure out where the bottlenecks are. C, when writing C for 6502, you have to GIMP a lot of the things to make it work, but it's fun to use. And C is the core language, really, and all derivatives are there to make it easier to work with. C# being C with Java parity and memory management. C++ used for, I mean, Yeah, that's partially true. I mean, the thing about why C and C++ are still used today, especially in game development, is that there isn't really anything better yet. I know Jonathan Blow is working on his programming language Jai, and that's JAI, and that the thing about the way he's developing that language is he's developing it coming at it from a totally pragmatic view of game development and performance, and taking convenience features that were worked into more modern languages than C, but in a way that's elegant and easy to understand. I mean, I haven't used C++ in in a modern form in about 7 years now, and it's just really awful. Like with the templates and the standard templates and stuff like that. Um, mm, from my understanding, most game developers don't use that stuff just because um, it's such a mess. And the same thing with object-oriented programming. I mean, some developers obviously do, and I believe Unreal Engine is extremely object oriented, but there's kind of two factions of game developers. One who argue that object oriented programming is terrible and a poor way to write game code because of the inefficiencies that are inherent in the way that abstractions occur and the code is written, and there are other people who think it's fine as long as it's used well. And like so many other things, the truth is probably somewhere in between, maybe leaning less towards the object oriented side, but certainly borrowing on some of the core concepts that it introduces that are actually useful. Yeah, I mean, that's most games are essentially state machines in a frame loop. Yes, I mean, there was that joke that was made that games are databases with pretty front ends. I can't remember who said that to credit them with that, but I mean, if you think about it, all software is a state machine, right? And the goal is to take data in and put data out. It's just, what is the goal of that data? Is the data your input and the output the graphics on the screen and the sound, or is the input customer information and it's run through a process and out comes billing information? That's what software is. Actually, I posted this on Twitter, and I don't know if everybody saw, but if you don't follow Brian Will on YouTube, you should, because he does some really nice videos on programming and come on. And he's got a couple of really good videos that he's posted, and one in particular recently, which is really great, called "Every Programming Language in 15 Minutes," and it's really good, especially if you haven't been programming for a long period of time. It's really surprisingly complete for 15 minutes, and obviously it doesn't go into everything. It doesn't go into things like multi-threading and complex topics like algorithm complexity and whatnot, but it really breaks down the core concepts of what your software does, right? And why it does it that way, or not just your software, or any software, right? So if you haven't checked it out, you should. It's really good. Even if you're a programmer, it's kind of cool to see him break that down, because it's once you've been programming for a while, it's kind of hard to think about it from any other perspective than someone who has programmed for a while, right? You generally just kind of, I mean, you do it, right? You code. But to think about it from a high level, sort of reflective perspective of what it is, the process is that you're doing, um, it's uh, it's important, and it's interesting to see him break that down that way. So definitely worth checking out. Excuse me. I mean, one of the things that kind of can burn you out when working in software for a long time, and I was posting about this on Twitter. I've worked writing software professionally for 20 years, and I'm not that old. I'm only 37. Um, One of the things that can burn you out is the fact that in some ways the work is very similar no matter what you're doing, right? Whether you're writing a game, writing a productivity application, whatever it is you're doing, you know, it's the same process, and you really have to enjoy that process of you have to enjoy that process of understanding problems, breaking them down, writing the code, solving the problems, debugging, dealing with customers. Um, you know, it's the same thing whether you're working on games or anything. So again, it's good to have that perspective and look back at it from you know, sort of um, a less seasoned perspective, um, to give you some reflection on what it is you're doing. Bonchaku, you've been writing 20 years too. You're 43, so you're not that old either, right? So you've been doing it for a long time as well. You know, but for me, I mean, I was coding before that too. That was the thing that got me into, you know, game programming was what got me into coding. Um, that's what I wanted to do. That's why I'm doing this. So, um, you know, probably been programming for almost 30 years, but as soon as I could, I got a job writing code because I was thrilled that somebody wanted to pay me to write code, right? Um, just not started professionally first. If you count as a hobby, that would be longer. Like you two, it seems. Yeah, yeah. So, um, what was I doing? Got all off on this side tangent. The collisions. I don't know what happened with the collisions. Let's add a collision into the middle of the map and see if maybe it's just a bug with it being on the edge of the map. Yeah, we should probably look at the attributes too. And then I think I'm going to wrap up here soon, though. I'm having fun, but I'm losing my voice and getting tired. I always have this problem, right? Here we go. Let's see if... see if this does what I want, or maybe I broke the collisions. It's possible I broke them too in the changes we were making, and that's fine. We'll fix it in the next stream. All right, let's see. Let's see if this... Okay, well, that's good. So it looks like it's a bug with the last row not colliding properly, but it's sort of a mean trick to have that collidable set of blocks there. I don't know why that seemed so funny to me, but it seems like the thing you would do is, you know, you have those collidable blocks, and then you have the bullets, and you got to kind of dodge, and it gets narrower and narrower. It's funny that it doesn't do that on the last row there. And then, yeah, and then the collision turns off. Okay, so I wasn't wrong that the collision is turning off. something to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is that it's only, maybe I don't know. I was thinking I want it to update with meta tiles. Maybe I don't care about that. Maybe just doing individual tiles is good enough for what we're going to do, because well, if we want to do anything with a little bit more detail, we're going to probably need to have meta tiles. Alright, well that's looking pretty good. That's doing the looping now. And then the invisible crashing. I wonder what's causing that transition. I have to look. What I was thinking earlier was that maybe it has something to do with the entities. Maybe maybe it's spawning some some enemy entities accidentally. Although it shouldn't be doing that, because I don't think it's processing that part of the game loop anymore. Let me move these down so that we can actually see these a little bit better. I'll probably move that over. So nice to be able to do this, have this debugging information. When I was working on the Game Boy Advance, the emulator that I was using didn't really have much in the way of debugging. And so I had there was interesting, I don't know what's causing that. We'll have to look at that in the next one. And so what I did to debug was, there was a library that had been written for a Game Boy Advance to parallel port cable I bought, and you could put debug messages, like log messages, in your Game Boy game, and it would print it to a console window like this. And that was extremely helpful to be able to actually see what was going on the hardware at the time, because we didn't have any official development hardware. We just had flash cartridges that we bought that were probably originally manufactured so people could pirate games, but that was not what we were doing with it. We were actually writing some of our own stuff there, an RPG actually. Has the artist given you tiles and designs for transition so you can... I haven't gotten them yet. He's been working on some... he's been trying to get the title screen to work. I had given him... Kasumi over on Nintendo Age wrote a tool for... I think I talked about this. A tool for... for generating the proper tiles, and that sort of helped, but he's still working on it. Yeah, ICHR. And so I'm just kind of waiting on that stuff. I've got enough that I'm working on that it's not holding me up right now. Could you use the Lua script to print out the name of the object that triggered the player explosion? Maybe. It probably is easier to just set a breakpoint on that. Just because I'm trying to think of what it would require, because then we would need the Lua to be watching that one position on the object's memory. And then if that occurred, it would then have to somehow know what was in use during the collision check, which is... let's see. Well, we know what the... So we know what the offset is for the object, or for the thing that's doing the colliding. I mean, I guess it's possible. I don't really know that there's a huge benefit to doing it that way versus just if we call the debugger and we look for, all right, so we know we're transitioning the player to this, to the explosion state here, right? So that's check player collision. And let's see, so we set a breakpoint there, and it's probably where it's occurring. And so if we go into the game and now let it kind of run its course, that's probably a faster way to do it, because then it doesn't really matter what caused it. It's just going to trigger the breakpoint, and then we can examine back what happened. If this were higher level code, it'd probably be easier to kind of suss that out of the data. But just given sort of the rudimentary nature of how we're interacting the objects and the projectiles, probably this is the easiest way to see what's going on. Assuming that, yeah, so it may even be that it's not a, let's see, that was check player collision. Let's check bullet collision. Let's see if this, no, so it's not that either. I mean, that's the thing, there are some, we're doing these checks in a couple of places, so it wouldn't even be necessarily possible to know. We first have to figure out where it's happening, and at that point we could just examine the data. Let's take a look and see where else we're. I guess it's possible that it's in the player code itself. Let's see. Collide bit shift. Yeah, it's, you know, it's entirely possible that it's the collision that's causing it, and it's just buggy. Collide bit shift. Let's see. I didn't think it was checking it, but it's obviously at least partially checking it. Yeah, here we are. So it's colliding with the background, or not the background. It's colliding with random data in the ROM that happens to map to something that would be collidable if it were valid data. In higher level code, it's simple debug of .log. Yeah, I mean, in higher level code, it's a lot easier to examine the entities. You have a lot more cycles to spare to look up things and sort of cross check your different items. You're not necessarily even splitting up your entities like we are here. So as a Lua output. Knowing what triggered the player explosion could have other uses, but as long as you can trace it. Yeah. The main thing is... Yeah, I suppose you're right. I mean, it's certainly relevant to know, because what you could do, that's a one thing. A simple way we could do it is we wouldn't necessarily know which enemy or projectile or background tile caused it, but we could have a byte called something like cause of death. And anytime we killed off the player, we wrote what it was that triggered that. And then in the Lua, it could be printing out, what the value of cause of death is if it's set to something other than not dead. And then that would mean that you would actually have, at that point, it would say, world collision, or whatever the case would be, collided with enemy, bullet collision, whatever the case is. So, that would be a simple way to implement that without doing too much cross-checking between all the different things in the game unnecessarily. So, all right. Or just add later some debug data and code that keeps references of the suspect. Yeah, I mean, it depends on how important it is to know that. It's a shame the emulator debugger can't run a separate thread and attach some C code to give you rich debug logging. Well, I mean, that's what the Lua is doing, right? The Lua is providing that sort of higher level capabilities, because you could do something like, I've seen again, Kasumi. He had written some Lua code that in the game, where the mouse is, he can drop objects into his level, and they're objects that are affected by the game core engine logic. They have physics and stuff like that. So he was showing a little animation where he had the game running, and he was just clicking along and dropping these blocks that would literally drop into the game, and then the player could interact with them, using the Lua to provide that capability. And then I think he could also manipulate existing game objects, move those blocks around and stuff. We'd even talked about the idea of if you had built, if you were building your game using something that had character RAM, and you had a way to retrieve the data, you could build a whole in-game editor to design the level of the game in Lua, interacting with the core engine of the game. So, do something like, if I'm looking at the level here and I'm thinking, it would be cool to have this thing, I could, using the Lua, have some sort of way of dropping new meta tiles into there and whatnot. So that's along the lines of what you were talking about, MDTA UK, and that would be pretty useful, I think. But it depends on the kind of game you're creating and how dynamic you want it to be and how hard it is to update what you've got. So the Lua is scripting that manipulates and interprets address values. Can you add hints in the code to send stuff to the Lua which does not affect the game? Not in the way that you're describing. You can. So what you can do is you can reserve a portion of the memory in your game for debugging that's only useful for Lua in a script that you've written when you're running it in the emulator. So the game is updating these areas of memory that have no function inside the game, but then when you are running it in the emulator with the Lua script, you can use that information to get more pardon me, you can get more detailed information about what's going on. So yeah, something like that is definitely possible. All right, I'm going to wrap here before I sneeze again. I think I feel one coming on. Wouldn't that affect cycle accuracy, having to write values to debug memory? Yeah, but at the same point, depending on how tightly packed your code is, it may or may not matter how cycle accurate it is, because if you've got lots of cycles to spare, the extra cycles won't do much. Like if your game logic is simple enough that you're getting it done, let's say you finish your game logic halfway through the draw of the screen. That means the other half of the screen draw, you're not doing anything. And then you've got the NMI being called during the VBlank to update what your next frame is going to look like. So that other 50% could be used for updating your debug data. If you're using the entire frame to update your game logic, hopefully only one frame. Certainly there are games that sometimes run over, and that's where you get slowdown. But if you're using most of that frame, then yeah, the cycle accuracy could be a problem, because then you might run over as you try to update your debug memory, and then that would impact the behavior of the game, which is obviously not what you want, especially if you're trying to debug a problem that you're trying to fix. That might impact the game in such a way that the debugging process actually unbreaks the game. And that's true of all software. There have been plenty of times where running the application under debug works fine, but as soon as you move to release mode where you don't have any of your debugging checks, it totally breaks. And sometimes that's due to timing, sometimes that's due to the debugging mode that your debugging code being generated is safer than the release code, but it's slower. And so for whatever reason, it's generating code that doesn't have a problem, even though there's a problem with your logic. I'm thinking more so in something like C, where you're maybe doing a slight buffer overrun or something like that. And for whatever reason, it doesn't trip up the debug assertions that would cause the application to fail in the debugger, to let you know that you've done that. That's a pretty... I guess that could happen, but it's not that common. That particular last case there. But trying to think of what other... I've seen issues where running not NES code, but running code. I mean, it applies to the NES too, I guess, because it's the difference of emulator versus real hardware, right? Running code, multi-threaded code on a single core multi-threaded CPU works fine, but on a true multi-core or dual processor system, your multi-threaded code breaks because it's now able to run truly independently, versus on a single CPU multi-core or multi-thread machine where the parallelism is different, because it's not true 100% parallel execution all the time. And in those scenarios, those are hard to debug. And usually usually they only get found when a customer opens a ticket that the application is crashing for them. And you kind of run through, well, what could be different on their system versus your systems that you've tested it with, and then you find that, and you have to figure out, all right, how do I fix this? I don't even have a system that replicates that. Dev kits do get extra memory, and probably for this reason. Possibly also, because they don't know how much they're going to have by the time the hardware releases, at least initially. 6502 is a lot more easier to debug compared to 190 today. Yeah. I mean, most of the problems we've encountered, I can say that 100% of the problems we've encountered have been bugs, not with Messin, but with code that I wrote, which is good. It always helps to have an emulator that's accurate, that is reflecting something reasonable. Versus, back to the GBA, I was working on something and they hadn't coded the emulator to the spec. And so while it worked fine in the emulator, on the hardware, it broke. And I had to work with the developer to get that fixed, because it was important enough that I really needed the emulator to be updated. And then most of the problems that come down to, something not working, it's just simple mistakes. It's not generally too complex. The NES is a pretty straightforward machine. So most of the problems you end up dealing with are just stupid things like I did before, where I do the ad, I check if the ad carried or not, I set the carry properly, and then I forget to store the first byte of the address I'm manipulating, or the coordinate I'm manipulating. So, yeah, it's the 6502 stuff is generally not the issue. Emulators like Messin can bring in the source code, visualize things. Only thing missing is console output. Yeah, I don't even know that I miss the console output. With having the debugger, having the Lua, having the ability to step through my 6502. Yeah, I'm not missing console output too much. I mean, in fact, a lot of times I try not to rely on console output. That's there more for, and even console output is less useful than, for professional stuff. You use log output, and even that, you're not writing your log output. And this is a common problem that you find with less experienced programmers, or programmers who don't understand what log output should be. They tend to write log output like they were essentially writing code that steps, log messages that step through the code. And it's okay to do that when you're debugging a problem, but generally your logs should be concise and informational, and help you identify a problem, not give you gigabytes worth of data of it running through every instruction, and then you have to parse through all of that yourself to figure out what happened. And I know some people like to have exactly literally what happened, but I've found that there's more value in having a log that presents you with the core state of things at the time the problem occurred, to at least help you think about what could have gotten you into that state. Or, gives you several different states of things that help you understand what led up to the error, than gigabytes of, every single update that occurred, every single query that was run, every single evaluation that was done. It's just, if I wanted that, I'd run it through the debugger. The fun will double once you start doing raster programming and bank switching. Yeah, I'm sort of aware of what trouble bank switching will cause, but it'll be interesting to see. Some dev kits allow you to connect to PC and run some kind of. Yeah, no, I know the I think the PS2 had that or whatnot, but um, maybe the problem with a machine like 6502 is to write things to the console could slow down to some degree the current games, so it could be affecting debugging too. So you have to do it another way: peek at the memory, figure out what to do with the data instead. Yeah, I mean, again, I mean, if it's something that's really problematic, where I'm just not I'm not understanding it, or I don't have the ability to attach a debugger to it, I'll do sort of line by line console output or log output. But given the choice of console output versus running in the debugger with the ability to step through code, I would choose debugger any day, every time, because I can I can fix a problem that's occurring on a machine if I can connect to it and run the debugger in almost no time. Whereas if I have to do it with the log and populate the log with data to try and figure it out from the log, it's way more time consuming, because you have to make sure you're logging the right information at the right time, and there are so many ways that you can mess that up. So it seems like there is scope to build an emulator debugger that runs in a parallel processor where labeled instructions could be run. But I mean, what's the benefit? You're talking about something where basically you'd just be seeing a stream of the instructions kind of being spit out, or some line by line console output. I'm just not sure. Again, it's kind of like I don't know. If I didn't have the debugger, I'd agree with you. I'd agree that having that would be extremely useful, because then I would need to know what's going on as the code is running, and that would be the only way to know it for sure, right? But to see the breakdown in detail, if I need to do something like examine memory for debugging purposes while the game is running, I have the Lua. If it's something that I want to see in a structured way, otherwise I can bring up the memory debugger and actually look at look at the bytes being manipulated in real time. I mean, that's the other thing, is that I can literally see the memory being manipulated in real time. So again, it's one of those things where in the past what we've done is we've set breakpoints on if a memory address is being written that shouldn't be, or if we're going into some code that I don't think we should be going into because it doesn't make sense at that point. You set a breakpoint, right? These are all tools that are so invaluable to working in your code, versus just a stream, almost like a stream of consciousness that gets printed out when you have a debugger. And I'm not saying that it's not valuable sometimes, but all these other tools, to me, and in my professional experience, have been so much more valuable. They've been invaluable to determining what's going on in the code, what the problem is, kind of sussing out what needs to happen to fix the problem. And I get the idea of what you're suggesting with the console output, but I don't know, and that might just be a matter of preference too. It's not even something that I need at this point. I fully accept I'm not technical, knowledgeable enough to advocate it. I'm only used to C# and being able to output debug strings when things happen. Well, so, and again, the debug strings is just another example of another tool at your disposal. The debug strings are just like log files, right? You're using it to print information because at the time, you may not know what's exactly happening. You may not be able to step through it. Again, I'm not saying that there's no value to it, right? There's value to it for sure. But when you have a tool like a debugger where you can step through, and it's harder. I'll say it's harder for multi-threaded code because debuggers really suck at working in multi-threaded code, or at least they did when I wrote a lot of it. But generally speaking, the debugger, is my first go-to when I have it as a tool at my disposal. The logs and consoles are definitely important when I don't, and certainly for languages like PHP, which I do use pretty regularly for work, because there's no easy way to set up a good PHP debugger, and I don't even know that there are any really good ones, to be honest. All I've got is my error log, right? That's how I record what's going on, and I've got my diagnostic of what occurred after I run my code in my JavaScript, and it talks to the back end, and I get an error, and now I go look at my error log and see the information that was coming in and sort of puzzle it out. But for like JavaScript, you can use console.log. For 90% of the debugging I do, I'm setting breakpoints and stepping through my code. If it's not a simple case of I just need to see what it looks like. If it's something where I just want to see what it looks like because I want to verify that the data looks the way it's supposed to before I even get into, stepping through and getting to why it looks that way. Console.log, definitely helpful. Remote debugging in IIS server was not possible a long time ago. Yeah, remote debugging was terrible and frustrating. Debug string is good when you cannot use the debugger. There are situations where it's necessary. For C#, it's quite useful to use the debugger. C# tries to put out human readable exceptions, not like C traces. They're like Java. Exceptions. They're definitely, they have their moments where they're just kind of like, what am I looking at? But generally, they're pretty useful. When Microsoft isn't deliberately hiding them from you. The thing is that C traces are just essentially memory dumps, generally. And, you have to use a tool to load them up and look at where the instruction was that was executing, and you've got to have your debug symbol information. If you've got all that and you've built your application correctly, you can load a C crash file, a dump file, into a debugger and see exactly what went wrong. You can see, where the code was, what your variables values were at the time, and you can see your call stack pretty well. The problem is that making sure your code builds that way to be useful that way takes knowing how to do that. It's not the default, and it's different for different platforms, whereas for C# and Java, it's basically the same. With C# and Java, you see complete state where you put the breakpoint compared to C and C++, so it's very useful. All of this it's really down to the tools you're using and how much debugging information you're willing to kind of put into the application versus, performance and what the tools get you based on that trade-off. And for what we're doing here on the NES, I'm pretty happy to be using... I'm very happy to have a debugger, first of all, and pretty happy with what Messin does. So, all right, I really got to wrap up now. Thank you guys for joining me on stream, and thank you for everybody for watching. As always, if you have questions, you know where to reach me. I'm on Twitter at Clervis. I'm on Nintendo Age as Zelius. You can reach me in my email, zelius@gmail.com. I will, as I mentioned, not probably be posting videos for the next 2 weeks, but maybe streaming. I don't know. I will try as I travel to do at least one. I know I've said that before, but it's tough when the travel is for work. Yeah. So otherwise, I will see you when I get back, and have a great night. Have a great weekend. Thank you. I will do my best to feel better soon, and I will talk to you all later. Take care.